You're listening to Chuck Talks. Two guys, two subjects with no script, little editing, and zero filter. Let's get to it.
All right, that will not be on the first part of the podcast.
Rolling.
Okay, now we're rolling. Good thing we started rolling 5 seconds ago and not 15 seconds ago.
Yep.
Anyways, guys, back to Chuck Talk. We stopped counting. It's a good thing when you stop counting. It means you've accumulated some content. So I hope you guys are enjoying the content.
I'm pretty sure we've done somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000.
Yeah, I'd say about that.
Good guess.
Yeah, and so, anyways, last week we had a Chuck Talk sans Chuck Talk, but this week I have the pleasure to let everyone know out there, Chuck is back.
Yo, 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 yo! Ba-doo, 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 ba-doo. For those of you who can't see the live stream, that was a couple dabs for you.
It was
Left
quite
and right.
A little embarrassing, Charles. I don't want to say
It's a weak dab. All right, so this podcast is going to be a special welcome back to Chuck Talk, where we might have a special segment. We don't know just yet. It depends on how he's feeling about the night. Charles, where have you been? Just tell the guests real quick. What's going on?
What's been going on with me? Well, you know, I'm trying to keep it together here and be professional because I know this is a professional show and we're always...
What?
Yeah, what?
I've got a lot going on, man. I am very happy to be back into my house, which I spent a long time and a lot of money, more than I care to disclose, on renovating my house. But my house is super dope now, and I'm really pleased about that. And I'm trying to do my work and deal with my house and deal with my wife, who just had a foot surgery, and there's just a lot of things going
and 2
on.
kids.
So, yeah. Let's just move on to something else.
All right, so tonight, guys, it's been a little, I guess, crazy, might be the way I'd say it, in the last couple of months. Like, you know, you think 2019 or 2018 and Donald Trump, you know, is crazy, and then 2020 comes around and smacks you in the face. And it's just like, wow, holy cow. Okay, so we've had a coronavirus pandemic, bunny years. And now we have civil unrest and riots and an economy that is ping-pong balling all over the place, and a global, I guess, direction that no one really knows where we're going. Serious lack of leadership at many levels. So we have a plethora of topics that we could talk about tonight, but I think that this week we've been researching a lot about how we police society. And I think that's where we want to start. And, well, actually, before we get into how we police society, Jeb, did you have any producer notes you wanted to go over?
Well, I only had 2 questions. First one for Charles. 1, how dare you? 2, where do you get off for missing last week? Anyway, it's a whole thing. You've already explained it. But anyway.
I beg for forgiveness. It's better than ask for permission.
That's fair.
Always. Always. Rules to live by right there.
I do have one not serious, but one legitimate producer note.
All right.
Last week we were talking about homeless, and
Oh, yeah.
Steven said that a lot of homeless prefer to live on the streets so that you could, I guess, confirm or deny.
Okay, let me back up. So I said last week that Charles worked at a homeless shelter in Boston for about 5 years, right? You worked at
It was 2 months, but...
It was 2 months. But you worked...
Oh, I know what you're referring to. Well, I had 2 different stints, so let me tell a couple quick stories. Story time with Chucky?
Okay, story time with Chucky, but the point is, you had experience working in homeless shelters in Boston at periodic times of your life throughout college, after college, correct?
Boston and New York City.
Boston and New York City. Okay, I could not remember. It was 15, 20 years ago. I just remember a very poignant conversation that you and I had, and I brought it up on the podcast, which is we assume as society, because we've made choices, like, I want a house with 4 bedrooms and a picket fence and Netflix and Amazon and a 50-inch plasma, that's what makes everyone else happy. Mm-hmm. And my point was that who am I to say that living on the streets is not a legitimate way to live your life? That was my point last week. And I just remember one poignant conversation that you had with me in Boston on the rooftop on Harvard Avenue, where you're like, a lot of the people that I work with who are homeless truly enjoy being homeless. And that's the message that I just remember seeing. And, you know, I remember you describing guys to me like, yeah, man, I go play the guitar, make $100, get a bottle of whiskey, buy a pack of cigarettes, and come here and get a free meal. You know, I sleep with the women I want to sleep with. I eat when I want to eat. I drink when I want to drink. I go to the bathroom when I want to go to the bathroom. Charles, I don't want any other life. And I remember you talking to me about a lot of guys that you knew. And I did say there's legitimate people who are, single moms with 2 kids who don't want to be homeless. And that is a problem.
Sure.
But who are we to say that we need, and I think my point was, who are we to say that our lifestyle and our choices are what's best for everyone else? But go ahead. You can tell your story now.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, and I'll tell the quick story. So when I was in college, I had the opportunity to do a paid internship wherever I chose. And so I chose to go to this place called the Haley House, which was in Boston and sort of the south end of Boston. And it was basically this big brownstone this woman, Kathy McKenna, had turned into like housing for people who wanted to be volunteers in this like kitchen shelter place, and they fed and clothed and slept like hundreds of homeless men and women in various places every day. And so I did all this different stuff. I worked in their bakery and I worked in their kitchen, and I interacted with a lot of the people, and I probably spent about 8 or 10 weeks there and got to know all the people who worked there, and I worked in their newsletter and did a bunch of different stuff with them. But I learned a lot that summer. And yeah, I learned that there were hundreds and hundreds of homeless people just in that little neighborhood who who would come there who were mentally ill and who didn't want to take their medicine, or at least I guess we would classify them as mentally ill.
I was going to say, we classify them as mentally ill.
Or just they didn't really want to live the way that society kind of wanted them to live, but they didn't want to take medication. They didn't want to be in a mental institution. They didn't want to, do things that their family wanted them to do, or maybe they didn't have the money to do these other things that, society or family were prescribing that they do. And I met people who were like, I can get a free meal 100 different places in this town. I can hang out in the park all day. I kind of remember that conversation that I had with you, Steve. And then later when I lived in New York City, I volunteered at this men's shelter every weekend. Well, it wasn't every weekend, but I did it a whole bunch of times. And so it was sort of a similar experience. And so what I kind of gathered over all of that time of meeting not only the individuals themselves, but also the people who worked there, was that there was just many, 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 many homeless people scattered across our land who sort of choose that life and may or may not want to change it, and may or may not have the ability to change it. And we should think about that when we see someone standing on the corner and say, oh, that poor guy, or oh, he should get a job. And it kind of like adjusted my judgmentalism, I guess I would say, about people who don't choose to have a house.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. And it's funny, you started saying mentally ill and you caught yourself like mentally ill described by what we think is normal, right?
That's a catch-all, right? Because that's a relative term.
And so it's just like, for me, if someone wants to live under a bridge or live on a park bench, or, ping pong ball back and forth between a bridge and a park bench, and then, save up enough money to take a train and go to Florida and do the same thing, and then go to Atlanta because he's got cousins there, and that's the lifestyle he chooses, who am I to say that that's not a good lifestyle? And that was my whole point. It's just like, we have to stop, because one of the things that came up last week on the ChuckTalks sans Chuck was that, people like, it's the straw man argument. Well, if you legalize heroin, everyone's going to be homeless and doing heroin. And my first response is, I don't know a single person in the world who's going to be like, oh, but heroin's legal, let me go abuse it now. I literally don't know a single person, And then the second one is, even if someone does decide to go use heroin to what you believe is considered abuse, who are you to say that they don't have a good life? That's it. And I could be completely wrong about this. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, like, and well, have you talked to him? Yes. And that's what I was saying last week. Is like, yes, when I grew up as a child, every Tuesday we volunteered at the homeless shelter for 13 years. My parents still do it. They're like 35 years now volunteering at the homeless shelter Tuesdays and serving the homeless. You volunteered a lot. Like, I was wrong about 5 years, but you did it off and on for many years of your life volunteering at homeless shelters. You meet these people. Yes, there are moms out there who do want a job and take care of their kids and want a roof over their head and live in a safe neighborhood. Totally. And we as a society should help lift them up. But there's a lot of dudes out there just chilling and they don't give a shit.
Well, and also the other thing, too, is the whole thing that like Kathy was trying to do, or at least part of what she was trying to do with the Catholic worker and the other place in New York, I can't remember the name of the church in West Village, is it was like people would come in there and go, I'm trying to find a clean pair of pants and a razor and a toothbrush and a clean shirt so that I can try to go and do a job interview and so like if people are actively trying to get themselves out of that situation and they don't want to be and they just need a place to crash and they need a little bit of help, these organizations and these places would want to help those people.
And that's great.
And that's great and that's cool and that's awesome. But that's the assumption that we make, is that every single person that we see kind of wallowing in their own filth in a cardboard box or whatever, if somebody could just give them a toothbrush and a clean pair of pants,
shit would be better.
They want a job at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily want your job or your money. And I also want to say, it reminded me of something. I used to do this in New York a lot. Whenever I'd be walking, because you'd see people all the time in the streets of New York, especially in like the neighborhoods I lived in Brooklyn and stuff. And you'd be walking with like food from leftover from dinner or whatever, or takeout or whatever you have in your hand. And they would ask you for money and I would offer food. And really rarely would people take food. And I always thought that was interesting. It's because what that told me was these people aren't starving.
No.
Like they're working. And if you're willing to give them a couple bucks, great. That's their job, is asking people for money. And if you don't want to give them money, then that's all right, cool, see you later. But they weren't starving. They weren't asking. There was one time a guy took food. I'm not saying there aren't people starving. I know there are people starving. What I'm saying is that there's people who need help and want help, and there's people who don't. And the people who don't, leave them alone.
And my point also last week was like, the bigger arching principle was, who are we to say that the lifestyle choices that we made are correct for everyone else? And are we just trying to convince other people, hey, really, you really need a dog and 2 kids in a white house with a picket fence and 4,000 square feet to be happy because it's making me happy? Not really. I'm fucking freaked out of my mind right now trying to pay all the bills and deal with all this bullshit. It's just like you're trying to convince people to go into your lifestyle because you want to be right. I call it the Christian principle. Like, a lot of Christians, and Jeb defended this last week. He's like, listen, I agree with you. There's a lot of Christians like that, but I'm a Christian, and I'm not like that. And I agree that Jeb's not like that. But there's a lot of Christians out there trying to justify their behavior and justify their belief by convincing others that they made the right one. Instead of just being like...
By the way, I do agree with you. Like, he's exactly right. There's a lot of people out there who do think like that.
And so like Jeb's like, hey, I'm really comfortable. I'm really happy. I don't need to convince you to be comfortable and happy like I'm comfortable and happy. If you want to be comfortable and happy like me, ask me. But I'm not going to go out and be like, hey, man, repent.
Exactly,
like, listen to me. If those people are so insecure. And that was the whole point of the homeless conversation last week. And I didn't want to put words in your mouth. And I said, ask Chuck next week. And then that's why I asked you.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, I appreciate that. Well, it's funny because you brought up some stuff that I hadn't thought about. And I was just sitting here thinking about it more. And as I think about it more, I remember that I did interact with homeless guys and women in New York, but it wasn't that often. It was a few times at a shelter in New York City, but it was primarily in Boston. It was mostly with the Catholic worker and Kathy McKenna, where I was there like every day for like 10 weeks. But I've always found it interesting because I remember having that empathic response as a kid of seeing somebody who looked dirty and hungry, and then later having that kind of cathartic moment as an adult, a young adult, and being like, actually, like, some of these people seem like they're kind of happy. Like, and I can't say what the definition of happiness is, but I do remember having conversations.
Yours.
Sure.
And that's scary, right? Like, hold on, this dude's living under a bridge. He's got like 2 different color socks on. Old pair of Nikes, and he
smells terrible.
Smells terrible.
That's a universal with homeless guys, by the way. They smell terrible.
And this dude,
but they don't care, which is a certain kind of freedom.
Yeah, and this dude's
kind of like being Italian.
And this.
All right.
Sorry, apologies.
Hold on.
If you've ever been to Europe,
had to get that out there.
So, anyways,
Southern Spain. You know.
So, anyways, the point is like it challenges yours, and it's just like I see how people like, we got to fix the homeless problem. I'm like, no, we don't. Like, if you're saying that we need to address issues of single mothers who would like to be have a house and they're willing to work and make sacrifices to do that, then yes, we need to fix that problem. But just the carte blanche say we need to fix the homeless problem. Which one? Like, which homeless problem are we talking about? Are we talking about like you trying to deal with your white privileged or black privilege if you come from upper middle class or upper class, and the guilt you feel for having a house and having your mom and your dad pay for your liberal education and $250,000? You're trying to address that issue? Okay, then let's admit that you're trying to address that issue at least partly, and then you want to go help the homeless. That's fine too. But don't tell me that we need to go save the homeless, because maybe a lot don't want to be saved.
I don't want your life.
Yeah, exactly.
I think a really good segue, and like
It's a sexy segue, by the way.
smooth, silky, sexy segue
Silky smooth, sexy segue.
into tonight's conversation would be to redefine that question to what is the homeless problem? The homeless problem, I think, could be better defined as developing a path for people who want to have the middle class life.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that does need to be fixed for, I think,
Well,
African Americans as well.
I do think it's a sexy, smooth, silky segue, because is this about police brutality? Absolutely. Two things can be true at once, though. It's also about socioeconomic inequality,
Yeah.
if not more so socioeconomic inequality. Do we need to stop police officers from kneeling on people's necks and killing them? Yes, we do. 100%. Do we need to stop and change our policing techniques? Yes, 100%. Would we be in this situation with this amount of upheaval had we never entered the panic pandemic of 2020 and unemployment be 3.5%? No, we would not be in this panic pandemic. Socioeconomic inequality, to me, is the greatest injustice that we have to resolve if we're going to have a society of equality.
And I want to jump in because I think that when you listen to, and I listened to a really great statement by Jalen Rose. I love Jalen
J-Man,
Rose.
I love Jalen
I think
Rose,
Jalen
yeah.
Rose is really cool because he's really turned into like an advocate and an eloquent speaker on current events. But anyway, he was talking about it gets really tiring for black men. He's in his 50s, I guess, to try to explain to white people why it sucks to have 400 years of oppression heaped on you, and you don't want to have to, like, you just want people to understand. Like, you're tired of having to tell people, and there's more that he said, but what I took away that relates to what you just said, Steve, is really it's the socioeconomic impacts of that. I mean, I know that there are other areas participating in a democracy and education
Police brutality.
and all of those things, but I think they're all in a way sort of a function of socioeconomic repression. So I think that really what you did when you who was it that said that basically the white man's had his knee on the neck of the black man for 400 years, and I think really George Floyd was like a metaphor for that. They've had their knee on our neck, and it's really been socioeconomic. We can't get the house we want, the job we want, that's kind of the point that a lot of people have been making.
I think, and this is the point that I make a lot on this podcast. If you come in your house and your bathtub was left on by your 8-year-old child and it is flooding your house, do you go get the towels to mop up the water, or do you turn off the bathtub? A logical person would say, let's turn off the bathtub. Mm-hmm. So if you have an issue where there is inequality, do you go and try to mop it up and just be like, hey, we're going to change our policing techniques and we might decriminalize this and make it just a misdemeanor? Or do you look at the real flooding issue, which is socioeconomic injustice? And it's I don't even know if it's injustice is the right word. I think it's just socioeconomic what we find ourselves in. Like, is it unjust? Sure, absolutely. But I don't think we need to argue whether it's just or unjust.
It's like Jalen said, the system isn't broken. It was set up that way in the first place.
Exactly. So the system is like, we can argue whether it's just or unjust, or we can just agree that the system is set up to where you if you have wealth, it is very easy to maintain that wealth. If you don't have wealth, it's very hard to obtain that wealth. And if you have a situation where for first couple hundred years of black men and women being in the United States, they were considered property. And then after that, they couldn't own property. And then after that, they couldn't vote. And then it was the Three-Fifths. And then it was the Jim Crow. And then it was segregation. It's just been a constant underpinning of, it's going to be really hard for you guys to get wealth and live in the same neighborhood I do. Some of it's racism. Some of it's bigotry. Some of it's indiscriminate racism. Some of it's racism and people don't even know they're being racist. Some of it's just...
I mean, that's kind of like what Greg Popovich said. He was like, look, if you're born white in America, you're in a position of white supremacy. Whether or not you choose to exercise that is a different question. But you've been handed a situation that's just so much easier to manage because that's how it was set up in the first place.
Right.
And so you can make choices and you can choose to go out and interact with people and, you know, have diversity in your life. And, you know, that's awesome and that's important. And I think that's also why he said it has to really come from, and I believe this on a lot of issues, the people who are the ones that set it up and kind of instigated the discrimination are oftentimes the ones that kind of have to tear it down.
Yeah, of course.
And like black men, for example, in America have been trying to put a stop to this shit for a long time, you know, hundreds of years. Right. But until white men in America and white women and people all banding together say, hey, this isn't fair, that's when things really change, you know. And so that's why it's kind of like the onus is on our generation and our kids' generation to have a catharsis and have a realization and be like, damn, I actually have to do something more than just be like, well, good for those guys for trying to do something.
Right. I mean, a couple of things. Number one is, you're right. Like, and this is the conversation we need to have. And to me, it's not about taking down statues or banning the Confederate flag at NASCAR events. Like, it's a little bit more complicated.
Bubba Wallace.
Yeah, Bubba Wallace. Hey, good job, Bubba. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. And
right.
I think that's kind of almost like the white man being like, okay, let's keep the industrial prison complex, but we'll get rid of the flag. Right. Like, it's just like it's like you know, putting up a white flag or sending a olive branch.
You want to ease the guilt.
Yeah, to ease the guilt, but that's not Machiavellian change. That is just like wanting to ease the guilt, wanting to appease a populace.
Right.
You know, it's like, if we really, really wanted to make change, we have to rewrite a lot of laws on the books, and it has to be a concerted effort by leaders of both races in both communities in order to go in, and it's going to take generations to change in order, if you want to have like stability in these neighborhoods with a culture of education, a culture of property ownership. Affirmative action is also a Band-Aid on a fucking, you know, a knife wound. You know, just like taking down a statue is a Band-Aid on a knife wound. Like, it's a lot more complicated than that.
All right, well, let me ask you a question. Sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
All right, well, here's my question. Do you believe in the concept of a tipping point?
Yeah, absolutely, totally.
So, because you were making me think of that, is it's like, I was thinking about how, like, there were abolitionists who were white guys in 1860. There wasn't a lot of them, but there were some. I mean, people tend to think that, like, for example, people tend to think that in the North, in the Civil War, everybody was anti-slavery, but it was actually a fairly small group of people who were the actual abolitionists.
It's funny. I got to interview there. So, like, I'm on this chat group with a bunch of friends. I'm like the only Southerner. And one of my friends, like, came to my defense last night because I was talking about the complexity of race in the South. And he's like, he's from the West Coast, and a lot of my friends are from New England, and they're like, he's like, yeah, guys, you all think that this is a Southern problem. It's not a Southern problem.
No, it's not a Southern problem.
Yeah, he's like, Stephen's brave enough to admit they have challenges in their culture in North Carolina. You are all a bunch of pussies who pretend that the problem's in the South. You need to own the problem in your white neighborhood in Boston and in your white neighborhood in New York and your white neighborhood in Chicago.
I'd be willing to bet that just as much of Massachusetts and New York and New England was built by slave labor as the South.
And it could be in those men, the white men of those eras today can be more racist than a white man down in the South.
Ask Bill Russell how he was treated in Boston in the
exactly.
1950s and 60s.
Especially if he missed a shot. Yeah.
Well, this was the point that I was going to make. So knowing that, my point was going to be this. Let's just throw out some numbers. Let's say 1% of the white men in America were abolitionist, anti-slavery, defending equality of all races in 1860. Well, it would probably be reasonable to say that by 1890, maybe it was 3%.
Or 5.
And by 1920, it was 10%. And now here we are, 2020. I would like to think and hope 70, 80, 90% of like white men would look around and go, yeah, Jesus. I mean, I don't know. I hope it's more than that, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard to imagine.
I definitely think
my point is that at a certain point, it tips.
Yeah.
And you pull down a statue and you have a protest and you do things that seem maybe like on their own that they're minuscule. And I'm not trying to diminish your point. I'm just saying like all that maybe there's a sum of those things that's greater than their parts. And then like sort of a watershed and things fall the other way when you have enough people and younger people, and we're 40, so people who are 15 are walking in these protests, and 20 and 25. And Jeb, you look like you want to say something.
I want to jump in. I want to let you finish.
Yes, sir.
And I agree. Like, I do think that a lot of young people are slowly, taking the veil off their eyes and realizing there is a social
injustice.
Thank you. But I'm worried. Like, all these protests and all these like vilifying cops. Like, yes, cops are kind of in the wrong here in a lot of ways.
Some cops,
not all.
I don't want to say all, but
That's fair. But I'm just worried that. How do I put this?
a backlash.
Very
A
carefully.
backlash.
Yeah.
Okay. No. Okay. And this is another thing I want to point out too. So, I grew up in North Carolina. I was born in 1979. I went to high school in downtown Raleigh, middle school, high school, elementary school, downtown Raleigh. I left, and then for the most part came back 22 years later. And people, I was like, oh, you've seen a lot of change. Like, Raleigh went from 250,000 people to 1 million people, Wake County, the greater Wake County area, for example.
More than that. And people ask me, and I've probably told this story half a dozen times. I'm going to tell it right now. They asked me what the biggest change I saw was. And without a doubt, the biggest change I've seen is the increase of black wealth in Wake County. Hands down. There is no questions in my mind. And I had this 22-year period where I was gone and then snapped and I came back. And I'm saying this because does it mean it's happening fast enough? No. Do we need to make it move faster? Yes. But let's also be proud of what we've accomplished. And I'm not like, oh my God, you're saying that, this guy shaving should kill George Floyd. Like, please, guys, two things can be true at once. I'm telling you right now, to everyone out there listening, I have seen major change. I remember 1985, 86, 87, going to restaurants, and you would see one black person, two black people, three black people. They would be the busboys. Literally. I remember listening to how my grandfathers and great-grandfathers spoke about black men and women. I remember it very, very vividly. 84, 85, 86, 87. I don't hear... There are probably people who still speak that way, but very few. When I go into a restaurant right now, half of Wake County is black, half the dinner tables are black. And so I go to I literally joined a golf course. I got really addicted to golf, kind of long story, but I don't think I ever remember seeing... I think the first person I ever saw play golf was Tiger Woods that was black. And now it's like every other foursome that's going off. So, do we have a long ways to go? Yes. Does every black man have a story about being abused by the police? Absolutely. Does that shit need to stop? Yes. But something is moving us in the right direction. Imagine Rosa Parks. Imagine, what was the name of the woman who did the Underground Railroad? Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman. Imagine if we somehow could conjure up their spirits and go show them a steakhouse in Raleigh with white people waiting on black people. They would have they'd be, what the fuck is this? And so we've come a massive long ways. Do we still have a long ways to go? Yes. Does it mean that it's fair? No. Do a majority of white people have the generational wealth? Yes. There's a million things that we still need to do, but something we're doing is working.
One thing I love about Steve, and you'll come to appreciate this if you haven't already, is his persistent optimism And sometimes the best way to find that optimism, I think his strategy is to take the macro view and to be comparative and to back it out and to look at like what's really happening on a longer term. And I think that's a really good point. I think you're really making a good point. I think that, the problem is really just like people want it to happen more quickly.
Of course.
And people.
Yeah, they want it. Everyone in the business world, I've been in the business world for 25 years, wants it done yesterday, including
Right.
myself. Like my employees all get mad at me because like you want everything done yesterday. Meaning like what I want is literally impossible. Because yesterday has come and gone.
Well, and the other thing, though, that I wanted to say is that let's talk about Germany for a second. So Germany and Hitler, they create,
They had a tough time there.
had a ridiculous, string of atrocities, 90 years ago? 80 years ago?
I mean, it started, when they lost.
Started in the 30s.
Woodrow Wilson's 14 points on the reconstruction of Germany is what really led to the Aryan. It was the backlash.
And
The white
so
lash.
the reason I'm bringing that up is I've heard some discussion about
That was
what
100 years
they
ago.
did to try to make it right. And what a lot of people say is what Germany did is they owned it.
Yeah.
They came out and they said, we want to distance ourselves from this Hitler, thing as much as possible. And we want to say we were wrong. This was terrible. We want to do retribution. We want to make it right. And that hasn't really happened full scale en masse in the United States about slavery and Jim Crow and segregation. It's happening here and it's happening there. But I think what Black America and white America in large part would like to see is the government and big corporations, which it's interesting. Like you've been seeing a lot of, like you've actually been seeing kind of a divide. Like, and I've been seeing like some of the stuff about how like some of these companies will come out and say, well, we don't support this, but then like you're looking at who they're giving money to and some of these candidates that they're giving money to. Or
Well, look at
super
NASCAR.
racist.
I mean, like NASCAR telling that you're banning the Confederate flag, like that. I mean, like it sounds like a joke, but that's fucking huge.
I mean, that's a swing, and I don't think that's
Yeah.
a joke. I'm just saying, like, I think we'll know when we can, because it took Germany a few generations, and this is what got me thinking about it, is like, it's been a few generations. Like, if I think about my grandparents, like my grandfather, who was born in Pascagoula, Mississippi 96 years ago. He's dead now, but he died when he was 94. And what he thought about
Yeah.
African American individuals, and then think about my parents, and then think about us in the South in 2020. A lot has changed, but I think I would like to see more politicians and business owners of all races just owning it, and as Jalen said, don't feel guilty about it. Like, quit feeling guilty about it. Just own it.
Yeah, I
Just be like, you know what? That shit happened and it was wrong and it was bad. And that's kind of what you're saying. I just wanted to vocalize it.
Yeah, I definitely think owning it is important. And like I understand that my white life has been different than a lot of other white lives, especially in North Carolina. Like I remember 1987 vividly canvassing for Harvey Gantt. And for those who don't know who Harvey Gantt is, he was a Democratic nominee, a black man, a Democratic nominee.
Played outfield for the Braves.
No,
That was wrong, Gant.
That's wrong, Gantt. In 1987 against Jesse Helms.
Yeah.
And I remember taking my dad and had me walk fucking miles, walking around handing out these little brochures, these little pieces of paper.
Steven?
Yeah, Steven, we're going to get out there and we're going to make the world better. And so like, okay, Dad.
Damn it, son. Speed up.
Yeah, exactly. I got to get 1,000 houses today. I'm like 8 years old, like sweating, running from door to door. My dad's driving next to me. And I'm sitting here handing out, promoting a black man. And like that, like, it's just like, it never occurred to me how so many other white people saw it. And like part of my challenge, I think, is trying to get black people to understand how white people see it and trying to get white people how to see it. A black people, like, and I'm in this like unique, call it privilege, call it not privilege, call it a rock and a hard place. I don't give a shit. Call it what it is. It's a situation where how I grew up is very unique.
Yeah.
And I tried. I was last night. I wasn't defending white people. I was trying to say to my friends who like are all fucking like so privileged, it's incredible, and they're all from like different parts of the United States, not the South, and they all have $100,000, $1 million trust funds, and you're like,
Who do you want to blow up? Let's drop a couple names.
I'm like, guys, you don't understand how
Bill, Craig, Bob.
Yeah, you don't understand how complicated race is in the South. Like you just don't and they're like, oh, it's not complicated at all. You guys are all racist and you lost the war. And I'm like, oh my God. Like if you're trying to make change in the South, that's the last thing you say to a man.
Right.
And it's just like, you have to understand, something like 1 in 11 white men at the start of the Civil War actually ever owned a slave. Like
right.
95% of our ancestors never owned a slave. Sure, we had the ability to move around freely, but we were all peasant farmers. There was an oligarch just like there's an oligarch today.
Sure.
And so it's just like when you start saying like you're all plantation owners, like believe me, I have a lot of white friends in the South that fucking hate the guys that live on the country club too. Like there's a mutual hate between the rich guy on the country club and the white dude who's picking up his garbage. Like it's just like it blows me. And when you start lumping everyone together and start saying like, oh, you're all racists, you all want to go back and fight the war again, and you all, it's just like, guys, you're making this so simplistic. Are there people like that? Yes. Are they horrible? Yes. But it's like it's such a small percentage, and when you start treating every white Southerner like that motherfucker, just like you guys get mad, like, oh, you can't treat every black guy like the guy on Cops that's like running away from the police. Well, you can't treat every white guy that's got his knee on a neck and with some MAGA banner behind him and say that's Stephen Christman. It's the same fucking thing, right? Like you can't generalize. What you need to do is get white America to own it, like Jalen Rose said.
Yeah.
Get white America to own it. That doesn't mean you need to make them feel guilty. It doesn't mean you need to make them feel angry. It doesn't mean you need to call them names. Get them to own it. And then you can try to get some empathy. Try to get them to try to understand it. And then you can talk to them. But like if you start name calling and stuff, it ain't going to work, guys.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
I think I have a unique perspective as well. I am the son of a farmer. And so, like, yes, 100 years ago, slaves were bad, sure. But, like, my dad never owned slaves. His dad never owned slaves. So, like, I'm not defending slave owners, but also I don't feel like I need to say I'm sorry because, like, we never did it.
Right.
I totally see his point, but also at the same time, like, I mean, I didn't do anything. My dad didn't do anything.
My grandfather didn't do anything. My great-grandfather didn't.
I mean, I understand that, and that's the thing is it's like nobody wants to apologize for something that they didn't do.
Right, exactly.
And so I think that owning it more means saying, and I'm just speaking off the cuff right now, but I think it more means saying, I recognize that because my ancestors set up this really unfair, discriminatory scenario, I have benefited from that. And that's what white privilege is. But it doesn't mean I, Charles, or I, Jeb, or I, Steve, did something wrong. And I think that's why Jalen was careful to say, don't feel guilty. You're not a bad person. Like, white guilt is kind of bullshit, too. And the white guilt kind of leads to the insecurity and the sort of like the anger and the backlash and the other things, the fairness and resentment. Yeah. Like, nobody is really going to listen if you get in their face and say, you're wrong, you're bad, you did you suck. I think it's more just like, right? I mean, that's just like, that's not.
That's my whole point.
The point is to have black people and white people sit down and have, black football players point out, hey, none of us own any teams. Hey, none of us are in positions of executive leadership. Hey, almost none of us are coaches. Most of us are just players on salaries. Why is that? Is that fair? Like, is sports really a microcosm for the world? Because if it is, that's pretty fucking unfair.
Right.
And so I think it's just owning it, I think just means like recognizing, like, I think I would guess, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and speak for like black men in America for a minute. That's probably a dangerous thing to do, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to guess if I were a black man in America, what I would want to hear your average like woke white dude say is just like, dude, that was really shitty and that shouldn't have happened and we got to work together to try to make it better and meritocracy and, less just racism is wrong. I mean, that's really like,
But I mean, that's
that's
also,
all you really have to say if you can live that way. And it's not that hard to live that way for a lot of us.
Yes, and I think to your point, in response to Jeb, is yes, there's a system in place where wealth begets wealth. Yes,
Yeah.
it's more likely that a white man has wealth to beget more wealth. There are more and more black men who have wealth that is begetting wealth, and I proposed this conversation last week on the ChuckTalks Sans Chuck. There are two men out there, Dwayne Wade and Magic Johnson, who have black transgender youth women, as children. And my question is, who is going to have an easier time in the business world to beget more wealth? Them or me?
That is a really good question to cover after the break. We need to hear a word from our sponsor.
Which is...
I think Mick Ultra.
Ah, there you go.
Okay.
All right.
Our quick break is over. Now back to the madness.
All right, so I was posing the question, and guys, really stop and think about this. You have Magic Johnson, Dwayne Wade, two of my favorite athletes. They have two children that are transgender. And who has an easier time for success in America? My child or their child? And the point of the question, there's obviously a debate. Now, if you were to say, like, the poor inner city minority child or my child, there's not much of a debate.
Right.
But there's obviously a debate. And I think most people would say, probably them. And the answer is very simple. They are further along in the system of wealth begets wealth.
Right.
Like Magic Johnson's connected. He's gregarious. He's a good-looking guy. His daughter's beautiful. She goes out. She wants to be a fashion icon. I mean, what better place to do it than have Magic Johnson be your dad in L.A.?
Sure.
Like, it's just, but like, so it's not. So is it about race or is it about socioeconomic differences that allow for success? And the point is, we keep circling back to that, like this whole race riot. Yes, a lot of the police, and yes, this and that, and yes, I still think the solution is stopping Kansas City policing techniques and decriminalizing everything, so that men don't have records, so they can go get jobs and they can participate in society. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, wealth is just so important if you want to beget more wealth.
Well, and I agree with what you're saying, and I understand, and I think that's true. But I also think that we should also remember that a lot of the people that we're talking about, of the 330 million Americans, and what do we assume, like 200 and some million are adults? What would you say? 200 million are working adults?
250 of the 350.
Most of those people aren't going to be Magic Johnson.
Right, of course.
Most of those people. And so I think where the real inequality hits, where the real rubber hits the road, is middle class and working class America. And that's where you see a lot of the economic disparity really kind of cut across.
Yeah, but I use that point not to like make it sound like every child in America is Magic Johnson's son.
No, I know.
I'm just using that point of how important money is.
I agree with you. I know. That wasn't the point you were making. I was just leaping off from there.
Apple's good.
I was just
Look at
leaping off.
that.
I mean, don't eat apples on air. They're so crunchy.
Oh, sorry.
I'll do a little bit of that apple when you get a chance.
But
But the point that I was making, it just reminded me of the real point is that where the wealth disparity really hits is the accessibility that educated white men and women have to quote unquote good jobs like middle management, executive jobs, moving up. Like a lot of times when these affirmative action and, diversity initiatives hits companies, it's on the bottom end of the totem pole. And it is harder so I would say that for Dwayne Wade or Magic Johnson, if their kid was to go get a job in a company and try to work their way up, yeah, they'd probably have an easier time because their dad's Dwayne Wade or Magic Johnson.
Right.
But if it was just like, random black dude or random white dude from Raleigh gets a job out of college at a company and tries to work their way up, I think you're going to find that there's more systemic racism.
You saw that study.
And it's harder for them to get to.
You can Google this study, Jeb. I think it was the University of Minnesota. They created 10,000 or 20,000 resumes with the exact same birth dates, the exact same curriculum, the exact same everything. And in Minnesota, ironically, this is where George Floyd was.
That's a good apple.
And they made 50. I don't want to be making this up, so look this up. They made 5,000.
You never
of the
make
names.
things
They
up.
made 5,000 of the names black names, like a Keisha.
Yeah, I've seen that study.
Or Jerome.
Yeah.
They put a name like Michael Smith, or they put a name like Jerome Robinson, and it was something like 80% more likely to get a callback. The exact same resume.
Yeah.
And
that's systemic subconscious racism.
Right.
And that's, Jeb, more of like what I would say is like, you didn't do anything, your dad didn't do anything, your grandfather didn't do anything, you guys shouldn't feel bad, but there's a certain
recognize it exists.
process that like your grandfather probably didn't have access to. Your father didn't probably have access to, just because it wasn't in the common discourse. But now we in 2020 have access to. I mean, it's kind of like, black men have been saying for 300, 400 years that the cops are beating them up. But now we have videos.
Yeah.
So now people are starting to believe them.
Yeah.
That the cops are beating them up. And so it's like people are starting to understand finally kind of what the challenges are. And again, I don't think that means you're wrong or you're bad or you did something terrible. I think owning it is just, damn, like we should be aware of that.
Yeah, and I am aware of that, and maybe not enough. Maybe I need to become more aware. And like, listen, I'm sure this podcast is probably hitting a nerve in every man, woman, and child in America if they're listening to it. And if you want to come on the show and tell me how I need to be more aware or less aware or what I should say or shouldn't say, like, please do. Like I am open to having the conversation.
We don't have more frank conversations because nobody wants to come off as sounding like they're uninformed. Nobody wants to come off as sounding like they're discriminatory or racist. Nobody wants to say something that gets misinterpreted because it's such a tender subject. But I think the reason that it's such a tender subject is because it is the elephant in the room, and it is really the underlying dilemma and the essential problem in America.
So you can hate Chuck and I and Jeb for producing this.
Don't hate me.
Don't hate Jeb. Jeb's like, I'm innocent. But I'm sure Chuck and I probably upset some people out there. And that's not our goal in having this conversation. If we're ignorant, tell us we're ignorant. But don't be rude about it. Just come and explain to us how we should see it differently. And I think Charles said it too. Like, no one's thinking with their prefrontal cortex. Everyone's in their hippocampus. They're so tender. Everyone's so. It's a challenging topic, and I don't appreciate being put into it. But in the words of Jalen Rose, I'll own it. I recognize that I'm in a situation as a leader, both in my community, in the local economy, in my schools, in my sports, with my money, with my attitude. And you want me to take down a flag, I'll take it down. You want me to wear Black Lives Matter, I'll wear Black Lives Matter. You want me to interview at least 50% of black people for placements in the job, I'll do it. You want me to support lower income communities, I've donated over $50,000 and 10,000 hours to a nonprofit in Panama City that worked mainly with minority youth. Like, I've done these things. I've owned it. I'm trying. You want me to do more? I'll do more. Tell me what you want me to do.
Well, I think that feeling that you're expressing is exactly what I'm talking about. Is just like that sort of exasperation of like, how do I make this better? And it becomes sort of a sense of helplessness or a feeling of helplessness. And then there's sort of like a recoil or a backlash because at the end of the day, it's like a conscious decision. Because as a white man in America, if you wanted to, I'm not saying you do, I think if you wanted to, you could just hire white people. You could just make money, have a house, play golf, and have a good life, and never give a shit about any people of color. Okay. If you wanted to, you have that option. I mean, at least until they, have a riot and like burn down your storefront, which may be the point of these protests and riots. I'm just saying you're not doing that, but you have that option. And so the conscious decision that you are making is the conscious decision that people can make and should make, but don't have to make. If you're a black person in America, I think you get up every day and you have no choice. You're just kind of like, well, either it changes or it doesn't, but like this is my reality until more people who are white of European descent decide that they want to, join the fight.
Yeah, but also like a point too is like, I think 4 of the top 5 people paid the highest paid at my company are not white men. 4 of the top 5, and
your company,
right? But this is like this is me encouraging other business owners out there, like, and the reason why is a pure meritocracy. Like, it's not like, oh, I feel bad for this person, I'm going to give them a job. It's like, no, they're the best at it.
Right.
And so it's like, I do encourage a lot of business owners out there, don't look at race, just look at green. Like, you want to make money, find people who make money. And you know what? I've had a hard time hiring white people because it's a very privileged concept of just like, I'll show up when I want to show up, I'll work when I want to work, and it's just like, dude, like, fuck you.
Well, and I think
maybe I'm racist. Maybe I hate white people. I don't know.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
You do hate white people. I think you discriminated against me all the time. But what I heard Jalen saying a couple of different interesting things. He was like, what other profession besides maybe Steve's company and professional sports where black people are the highest paid? People of color are the highest paid. And why are most of the guys in the NBA and most of the guys in the NFL people of color? Because they're the best at it.
Right, exactly.
And so they deserve the salaries that they make in the sense of like the money that they generate, the revenue that they generate. Like, you're hiring LeBron James, you're not hiring Charles Hassel because LeBron James is a lot better at basketball. But
not a lot better, slightly better.
All right, slightly better. I mean, if we played 1-on-1 and we played best out of 5, I might get one. I might get one. I'm just gonna go on record,
One bucket.
LeBron, you heard it. Come defend your turf.
By the way, I couldn't really find, but the study was done by Harvard in 2016.
And what was it?
What do you mean? What was it?
What was the study that they did the resume thing?
Yeah, the study.
And what was it? What was the
basically said, like, they were saying if you whiten up your resume, their words, if you whiten up your resume, it does better.
I mean, like,
well, I remember
do we
when
really need to do a study to like?
Right.
Like,
I'm going to tell you this. When I moved to New York City in 2004, I had a roommate who worked for a staffing agency for temp jobs.
I remember you worked at American Express, didn't you?
Yeah, let's not bring that up right now.
I got my harmonica
you
ready.
sat in front of the
This
computer.
particular friend. That's for a whole nother podcast. But this particular friend of mine, shout out to Annalena, she worked at a staffing agency. I remember going into her office because what they would do is they would bring you in and they would interview you and they would review your resume and they would talk to you about your skills and stuff so that they got a sense of you. And then they were the middleman, right? And then they would reach out to the offices and places around New York who needed temps and figure out. They were a temp agency. So she told me, I remember us having a conversation about like race and I don't know, discrimination in the workplace and stuff. And this was, 16 years ago, almost exactly. And her being like, I feel really bad because I get these girls in here and guys in here from Brooklyn and Harlem and the Bronx. And like, they can type and like, they can answer the phone. But instead of answering the phone the way you, Charles, might answer the phone in a middle-class white household, which is the norm and the expectation in an office in Manhattan, which is, hello, this is Charles, how may I help you? It's, yo, what up? And like, I'm not being discriminatory. I'm just saying like they had different cultural norms than were what was expected in these office environments that were just learned. And that was just how they were. And it wasn't good or bad, but she was like, I'm having a really hard time placing these guys and girls because that wasn't their names. It was just like how they spoke and how they dressed and stuff.
Yeah, they're not
and it was just
any less intellectual or any less, their IQ is any lower.
But
It's
I was
their
just
cultural
picturing these
differences.
lily white, offices, law firms and accounting firms and investment groups in Manhattan, and they're expecting somebody who walked in the door who looks, dresses, and talks like them.
Well, it's like
'cause that makes them feel comfortable. Even though the other person can perfectly do the job. It ain't rocket science. I mean, I did it.
Right, but
Answer the phone, open the door.
also,
it's not that hard.
That's the systemic part. Like one
That's
of the big
the
ones
systemic part. It's cultural.
One of the big ones too is like standardized tests, right? Like golf is to tennis as canoeing is to, and it's like, what if you were to say, 3-on-3 street ball is to chain net is to, a white kid would be just as lost, and a black kid would be like, oh, that's this and this, and a white kid would be like, but if you to the black kid like. A 9-iron is to a driving wedge. Like, he has no reference to what that is. Like that's not his intellect talking. It'd be like if I started speaking to you in Spanish and you don't speak Spanish. Like,
well, if white people make the tests,
exactly,
and white people review the tests, and white people administer the tests, and they don't realize that they have a certain cultural association, then who's going to do well on the tests?
Exactly.
And that's the ownership. That's the thing to recognize, and that's the thing that we don't really want to talk about because we want to say, well, I'm just colorblind and we're all just the same. But we are just the same. We're all people. We all have a heart that beats red blood, and we all, we are the same. We're people, right? Obviously. But we also have cultural differences that impede communication.
So my question is to, and this is where we're looking for we got some surprise guests we want to have on the show soon, but this is my question, like, how do we overcome that? Because like I could be wrong, but I think black is 13% of the population, 15% of the population. I'm not certain what it is, but
Chris Rock said Detroit, Chicago, New York is like 10 places.
But the point is like 85% is not. So if you're talking about like a democratically represented place, you should have 15% of the power if you're 15% of the population. You should have 15% of the jobs. You should own 15% of the NBA teams. You should own 50% of the if it's equal, right?
Right.
If it's cut by race lines. But the point is like that's practically.
Well, also 15% of your company should be
right.
People of
15%
color.
of your economy.
Well, also, I think we should say we're not just talking about African American. We're talking about people of color.
Right.
Latino, Asian.
So many
Caribbean.
Latinos are here undocumented that they're afraid to speak up, but they get the same treatment from.
But our nation,
76% is white, by the way. 76% is white. 13% is black.
Okay, so I literally
but
said 30%.
I think it's less because we're doing a census right now, and what's that based on?
That is based on the census
2010.
It's not gonna change.
Well, we only do a census every 10 years.
Right.
I think in 10 years it's changed.
Yeah, I have no doubt that it's like 76 to 74, but it's changed.
No, I bet it's like 65.
No, Charles, that's like a massive change. That's no. But like the point, it doesn't matter. The point is like if you have almost 80% of the populace, of course you're going to have almost 80% of the power and control, and then you extrapolate that out to how the previous 400 years went, you're going to have 95 to 97% of the control. And is it fair? No. But like, what do we do about it? And people are like, okay, you want me as a company to give more opportunities to people, but how can I exist if my goal is to sell to like white suburban mothers? I need someone who understands white suburban mothers.
Right.
And so it's like
it's specific to the company.
It's specific to the company, to the industry. And so it's like it's almost if you said, hey, you need to go hire 10 minority kids. They need to go sell to white suburban mothers in Alabama. It's just like, man, it's just.
All right. So this is the question that I had in my head yesterday because I was listening to Jalen and then I was listening to Jacoby who responds to Jalen. And he goes, we have to figure out a way to, improve diversity with hiring and with higher up in companies. And I was like, okay, but how do you do that and who does that? And there has to be a think tank or an organization or a strategy. I don't know. Like, that sounds complicated.
It's very complicated.
And I don't know. But I would be interested. And so I think that's something we should explore.
We got to brainstorm it. We got to brainstorm it. But, like, for example, guys, I'm just going to say it like it is. My company mainly sells to, like, middle, upper class white women. That is who our product line is to.
Yep.
That doesn't mean that a young minority child from the inner city can't go speak with them or sell to them. It's just a lot more challenging. Just like if I took one of these upper middle class white women and said, okay, you need to go into the inner city and you need to sell X. They couldn't do it.
Sell hair products to black women in the project.
They don't understand it. They don't know what they... And so it's just like, that doesn't mean we should... That doesn't mean that we should, hate each other. That doesn't mean we should grow separate economies. No. That's why, like, the bathtub analogy that I gave earlier, for me, the first thing you do is turn off the water. And the best way to turn off the water is stop with how we police our society and what we demonize as what we deem as criminal. After that, you can start adjusting the socioeconomic challenges, where it's like, hey, everyone's got some wealth, everyone's got a house, everyone's got a piece of property, everyone feels like they can buy
40 acres and a pool.
I thought about that too. Like, that was like, you remember Nelly's song back in the day was like 40 acres and a mule. Fuck that.
Nellyville.
Nellyville. That's right. And he was making fun of that notion that, like, when the reparation for, slavery was like 40 acres and a mule. And that was like the government saying, hey, here's your chance. And is it fair? No. And like a lot of black people do clamor for, hey, we need reparations. We need to be made whole. We need to be paid for this and paid for that. And I'm not necessarily against that. I just want to know how you would propose that it would work. Like, explain it to me, flesh it out a little bit more for me. Like, you want to write an open-ended check. At what point do the checks stop? Do you want this? You want that? Tell me, like, propose like hard numbers to me.
Well, and back to Jeb's point, I mean, it's like his grandfather didn't own slaves, his father didn't own slaves, he didn't own slaves, so does he have to pay for that?
Right.
And why does he have to pay for that? And I mean, is there a difference between voicing, okay, this is unfair, I'm against racism, let's move forward together, and actually having to fork over the dollars?
I go back to
because that's a different thing, I think. Can I get a bite of the apple?
Yeah, the Steve Adamus saying, man, I've said it a million times, I'm going to say it a million more. There's all the difference in the world between trying to make people equal and treating people equally. And I think we don't treat people equally.
Steve Adamus.
I don't think we treat people equally right now, and we're trying to make people equal. I'm clamoring with my vote and my leadership, and I'm putting my money and my mouth is, let's treat people equally. We're still not. And the reason we're not is we're giving a bunch of 18-year-olds with guns and badges and high school dropouts the ability to decide who goes to jail for 20 years and who doesn't.
Pew, 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 pew. Silky smooth, sexy segue. Let's talk about police for a minute.
Oh, God.
Can we talk about police? Because I just heard a siren. And I just heard a little mention of guns and badges. All right, so I want to talk about my man D. Ray McKesson.
Okay, but hold on. Before we go any further, I just want to say that my proposal, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, oh, that's this or that. My proposal.
You talk so much, you should have a podcast.
I know, right?
You should have 3.
I do. PPF, mansplaining, and ChuckTalks. This is my proposal. It's very simple.
Bring it.
Kansas City policing technique. The cops cannot be involved unless they are specifically called to a scene, meaning that there's no stopping traffic accidents, there's no preventive policing, zero, zip zilch.
Yeah.
They can only go, hey, there's gunshots in that neighborhood, go check it out. They can't go into that neighborhood, set up a checkpoint, and just start stopping cars. Yeah. I don't care. Well, drunk driving is going to go up this and that. Well, what we're doing is not working. The definition of crazy by Einstein is doing the same thing every day, expecting a different result. So let's just see if it goes up. If it does, we'll address the techniques. But what we're doing right now is not working.
And actually, it has been explored, so we do have data.
And then the second thing is anything that does not have a clear physical victim is not a crime. Period. The end. And then my third thing is everything in society, everything has a 20-year sunset provision, meaning we want to criminalize drugs today. We want to say that marijuana is illegal in the state of North Carolina. In 2040, that expires unless we vote for it again. That way, we're not stuck with our parents' morality. And then my fourth thing is to make something criminal, it has to be 70-30. If not, it's a suggestion. 51% to 70%, it's a suggestion. You should not, if 51% of the populace says you should not smoke pot, it's a suggestion you shouldn't smoke pot. If 71% says you should not smoke pot, it's criminalized. So,
and the other 29% is high anyway.
So the point is, and it only lasts for 20 years. So let's do marijuana. This is my suggestion.
I don't do marijuana, man.
This is my suggestion. We vote today as the state of North Carolina. Should we criminalize marijuana? Yes or no? If 51% say yes, it's not criminalized. It's a suggestion that it's not good for you. There's nothing that can stop it. It's just that we say as a society it's not good for you. At 71%...
Strong suggestion.
At 71%, it's criminalized. In 20 years, that expires in the year 2040. In 2040, we vote again as a society. Do you want to criminalize it? Oh, 68% this time?
I would even say vote every 4 or 6 years.
I mean, you could do it. That would be a lot of voting, but that's. I mean, like,
well,
we can debate this.
They put these amendments on the ballot.
That'd be like, then you wouldn't have a constitution. I'm like, dude, it's called an amendment because you can amend it.
The Constitution is supposed to be a living, breathing document.
Exactly.
I was living in Denver, Colorado when Amendment 41 passed.
Right.
And it made marijuana illegal.
When
can I tell my Amendment 41 story?
I've been clamoring for the legalization of drugs, not because I like drugs. I try to like marijuana. I don't really like it, but like, I've been clamoring.
Have you though? Have you tried?
Yeah, I've been clamoring.
I was there when you tried.
I've been clamoring for 20 years to legalize drugs because I've seen the toll it's taken on my friends from basically minority neighborhoods, whether they're in jail or dead. The drug war is a failure. It's been a failure. We need to stop it, and we need to stop it now. It's not going to make society less safe. It's going to make society more safe. I swear, I will bet my life on that.
Can I drop a little knowledge?
So I'm sorry. I've been giving a lot of points because I'm so tired of them. Like, well, what are we gonna do? Well, I'm proposing shit that we can fucking do, man. I'm saying criminal law has to be 70% of society. If not, it's a suggestion. I'm saying 20 years, the shit expires. If we don't vote to criminalize it again, it stays that way. Third, you pass an amendment. Unless there is a victim, there cannot be a crime. Period. The end. Fourth, cops should not have the ability just to stop randomly. I don't care if it's for running a stop sign, running a red light. I do not fucking care. Cops just should not be involved, especially some guy with a gun and a badge, unless there is a serious issue being taken place. There are 4 things right there. White America. If you really want to change and help Black America, I swear to God, those 4 things will help more than anything else than just being like, oh, I'm not racist. Oh, Black Lives Matter. Like, if you really want to do something, there's 4 things right there.
Can you, I mean.
That was a Steve explosion, by the way. Steve explosion.
I'm red in the face right now. I've been saying it for 20 years, man.
Can you go a little further? Like, you don't have to explain every theory, but just explain a little bit on how that would help this situation.
Okay, for starters right now, jail is a huge business, and you need to have people in jail. 95% of people in jail right now are for nonviolent crimes. So the only way you can fill up a jail cell.
5% of arrests the police make are for violent crimes.
So to fill up a jail cell, you need to have...
That's a fact.
...crimes. And you can't have a crime...
You can check that if you want.
You can't have a crime unless there's a victim. That's just a fact to me. If I go outside and I try to kill myself and I slit my wrist, does that mean I should be charged with attempted murder? No. Right? I should be helped with a mental health counselor. Right? Like, I obviously have mental health issues. You know, So the point is,
And drugs should be viewed as a mental health issue.
drugs are a mental health issue. Like, it's not a crime. And be like, oh, well, look at all the property crime. That's because drugs are really expensive. If you let the free market sort this shit out, fucking a gram of coke would be $5. And that doesn't mean they're like, oh, everyone would start using drugs. Raise your hand listening to this podcast if all of a sudden you're going to go out and try Oxycontin and heroin tomorrow because it's legal. Like, no one. I mean, come on. Jeb raised his hand. He's
Had to.
Yeah, he had to. But
Yeah, the reason you don't do those things is not because they're illegal.
it's the reason why you wear a seatbelt. Who's afraid of a $75 ticket? No one. Who's afraid of their head going through a windshield? Most people. You wear a seatbelt not because it's illegal not to. You wear a seatbelt because it's the thing that guarantees your survival if you get into a car wreck, or most likely.
I want to jump in on the drug thing. Can I jump in on
Sure,
the drug
dude.
thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I read a really influential book that my Uncle Ned gave me a bunch of years back called Forces of Habit. And I learned a couple of big important takeaways. One was most of these drugs that are illegal now, like heroin and cocaine, were originally legal and were introduced for medicinal purposes. And when it was discovered that they were highly addictive or really damaging and destructive, they were made illegal. And so
Instead of informing the populace, this could be dangerous.
well, that, and also that explains why most people don't really do them to excess, because they're destructive. You're not going to do a whole bunch of heroin and cocaine, whether it's legal or not, if you don't want to die.
Right.
And so it's kind of like a self-preservation thing. And if it's illegal and you still really want to do it and you're really addicted to it, clearly people are still really going to do it.
Right.
And so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, to get involved in that way. And then the thing with marijuana is this. Marijuana is a plant. It grows naturally all over the world. And it is really easy to grow, easy to cultivate. And I'm not talking about like the super master blaster hydroponic, souped up like 30% THC. Like that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about like, the natural version.
It's a weed.
Of the
It grows
plant
like a weed. That's
is-
why it's called weed.
is a weed, and it is typically associated, I believe, if I recall, it originated in the Middle East and Eurasia and places where people would use it medicinally or for spiritual purposes, and they didn't drink in a lot of these like Muslim cultures, but marijuana was accepted. They have got the hookahs and all that jazz. And so then when we white Americans brought Africans over to the Caribbean, and we wanted them to do things like harvest and boil sugar cane and these things, we allowed them to have marijuana because it would kind of like dull the senses and ease the pain. And so then what happened is marijuana has been associated with black and Muslim, and so Puritan white Americans in the 16, 17, 1800s didn't want anything to do with stuff that was culturally black and Muslim, and so marijuana got demonized.
Right.
And so that's why it became criminalized and illegal and didn't really have it. And meanwhile, alcohol...
Chucky, that's a good point. And thank you for saying the word alcohol, because that was my point. Is if the argument is drugs are dangerous and they cause crime to happen... For someone who's been in a courtroom many, many times, I can tell you right now that when you look at domestic disputes, which is a majority of violent crimes, all of them, not even a small percentage or a large percentage, all of them start out with the defendant was inebriated. The defendant smelled of alcohol. The defendant admitted of abusing alcohol. So if our goal was to stop abuse from victims, meaning like I beat up Charles or I beat up my child or I rape a woman, if our goal was to stop that, we would be focusing our energy on what? We'd be focusing our energy on alcohol. But why are we not focusing our energy on alcohol? Because it's the drug of choice of white people. Mitch McConnell sits around and drinks a Kentucky bourbon. He doesn't sit around and smoke a doobie. And it's just like, that's really funny. No, it's fucking true. That's the fact. That's why alcohol is completely considered kosher, and getting fucked up is cool, and smoking a joint is demonized.
And I don't know if you heard about the Harvard study where they had Mitch McConnell smoke a doobie every day for 30 days instead of drinking Kentucky bourbon, but he was actually much more reasonable in his policies. I think you should do that again, Mitch. Come on, dog.
Mitch, smoke it, light it up, inhale, exhale.
I did find a percentage of prisons. I just want to give you like a little.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I think it's really funny. What do you guess? This is according to the BOP, Bureau of Prisons.gov. What is the percentage of drug offenses right now?
80%.
45.
50.
45%?
All right.
What is the percentage of homicide, aggravated assault, and kidnapping offenses?
5%.
10.
It's 3.
3. Wait, say it again. 3% is
3.2.
3.2% is
homicide, aggravated assault, and kidnapping.
Like the most
kidnapping.
the worst
Yeah.
crimes.
the
And then
ones
rape.
that make the headline.
What is
3%?
I know. I think I know where this is going.
What is the percentage of national security? Yeah, I think this is fantastic. What is the percentage of national security? What do you think?
20%.
What do you mean national security?
What is
like violations of national security?
Yeah.
Like Homeland came and got them because they
Yeah.
were like saying some shit about the
Oh,
president?
is that migration though? Is that like?
no? That's the second one. Get ready to go to that too.
Okay.
What is the percentage?
Oh, then
so a
5%.
national security imprisonment?
yeah,
Yeah, Guantanamo Bay.
like what you would think would be terrorists.
I would
basically.
think
5%.
I would think none.
0.
Zero,
You're
okay.
right. And then the last one, there's a lot of them. You can ask me whatever you want. But the last one, what is the percentage of immigration?
20%.
10?
5.
All right. What is that? There's a big sector missing.
Yeah.
Is that property crime?
Property crime. What was that?
Well, we didn't hear about manslaughter,
So-
second degree.
No, that's in the
murder.
3%.
No,
Property crime.
Yeah, it is.
3% was.
Would that be extortion,
homicide.
fraud, and bribery?
No.
Uh,
So 45%.
burglary, larceny.
Yeah, what is
oh,
that?
there we go. That's 5%.
Okay. See, I would say that's drug offense,
But they have drug offenses. Drug
Right.
offenses is 45.
but I would say
45%.
half. But
45%.
But I would say that's lower than I thought
Gotta
it
be
was.
the largest chunk, though.
Oh,
It is.
yeah.
It definitely is.
But my point is, like, when you see burglary and larceny, it's usually because drugs are really expensive. So my point is that would disappear as well
Well, okay.
if you made drugs cheap. But okay,
Maybe.
so that's so
People rob
read
out
them
of
off
desperation.
read them off in order of the most to least.
Okay. It's not in that order, but let me figure it out. So 45 is drug offenses.
By far and away the most,
Yep.
almost half.
I wonder what number 2 is.
19% is weapons, explosives, arson.
Weapons, explosives, and arson. 19%.
Okay. See,
Aren't there like 3 million people imprisoned yearly?
that's like 600,000. So
600,000 people are burning shit down or marching around with weapons.
that's like a really broad category. But here's my
But what does that
But hold
include,
on.
though?
But
what are they doing?
Hold on, let me extrapolate out a few things on like how I interpret this.
I just want to know my fellow Americans.
45% are in
Burn
for
it.
drugs. 20% are in for basically weapons. Yeah. Okay. My guess is those weapons exist because drug trades are really valuable. So there's 65.
Right.
That's 65% to me criminalizing drugs of why we have a jail cell. Then you add in 5% of property crime. That's 70%, meaning 2/3 of people in prison right now are from our failed efforts of the drug war.
Slow down. You telling me you can get 4 years of schooling in 6 hours? No. What what I really want to say is explain to the people why the AK-47s and illegal automatic weapons relates to drugs for those who don't, because you're going quickly.
Okay. All right. So what happens with a black market, and ironically we call it a black market, not a white market, right? Talk about like systemic issues. With a black market, there's a massive value for people who are willing to take the risk to provide the service or the product. And to take that risk, there's a lot of value. So like if I'm willing to go out on the street and hustle a drug, I'm going to charge $20 or $40 because I'm taking a risk because I might go to jail. And someone sees the value of the risk that I'm taking and says, I want to be able to sell to these 10 people who are smoking Stevens pot or crystal meth or whatever I'm selling. So I say, well, I need to arm myself.
Dope.
And then what happens is the police come to get these people, and they have two things on them. They have drugs and they have guns. And the drugs they can throw away, they can swallow, they can hide. The guns they can't. Also, when you have a drug possession or a gun possession, you might get 3 years for a drug. You might get 10 years for a gun. So the prosecutor is going to go after the heavier crime. So when you say 20% of people are on weapons possessions, my guess is when you extrapolate that out, that most of those weapons and possessions are because the drug trade has a massive value, and they're either trying to protect their turf. They had drugs on them and flushed them down the toilet, but they couldn't flush the gun down the toilet, or they plead to a weapons charge because that's what the attorney the attorney general or the prosecutor wanted them to plead to because it was a higher punishment than the drug charge.
But aren't there other reasons that people would have weapons?
Yeah,
could be
but
robbing a bank, you could be.
Yeah, but yes, totally. But I don't think that's 20%.
That's a minority.
Yes, absolutely. So my point is this: if people are like, well, what would happen if we legalized drugs? I said several things. It would be very similar to what happened with marijuana. We would tax it, we would make money off of it, and we would regulate it. So we legalize, let's say, everything under the sun. You name it, we legalize it. We would have certain parts of the city where you could go buy it, certain parts of the city where you can consume it. You could not even criminalize it. If someone's using heroin outside the park, they're allowed to. You push them back to the park.
This has been done in other places.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's been done in Copenhagen and Amsterdam and other
and
countries.
Some failed and some succeeded. Portugal is a good one.
Uh-huh.
But also what you do is you take the...
I remember Portugal.
People are like, defund the police. I'm like, well, dude, that was a crazy time. But like, you don't defund the police. You refinance public safety. That's what like... If I've decided that if I go out there and say defund the police, everyone's like, Steven, he's an anarchist. But if I say let's refinance public safety, let's take the money we're using to pay this police officer and let's pay a health counselor.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
all right.
We need to refinance how we see it. Like we don't need right there between drugs, property crime, and weapons. That's like 70% of people in jail. We don't need to be trying 2 million people or 1.5 million people a year and getting these people stuck in jail and stuck in a system and then come out and become worse. We need, because they were going to be in there with the rapists and murderers who deserve to be in there, we need to redirect our efforts and our resources.
Yes, sir.
That's what I'm saying.
You sound like a lesser, whiter version of D. Ray McKesson. I want to talk about my man. D. Ray McKesson, because that's where we're heading.
D. Ray wasn't
D.
my
Ray
man.
McKesson has started a group called Campaign Zero, and he has the 8 Can't Wait. The 8 Can't Wait reforms were adopted by the Raleigh Police Department just a couple days ago. Whoop, whoop. Shout out to Raleigh. But here's what I heard D. Ray talking about on the Bill Simmons pod a couple days ago. D. Ray was talking about how 5%.
D. Ray's a fan of the show, by the way.
Huh?
D. Ray's a fan of the show.
D. Ray is a fan of the show. He just doesn't know it yet.
Exactly.
He totally is. And I'm a fan of D. Ray. And the thing about D. Ray is he has really made a comprehensive study of what's going on with police in America. And he's talked a lot about police brutality, and he's talked a lot about arrests. And he's in the news a lot right now. But the thing that I learned from D. Ray is that 5% of arrests are for violent crimes. And so, to Steve's point, there are a lot of situations that go down where you don't need a guy with a gun showing up on the scene to handle it. That's not necessarily the best thing for that situation. And I think it's 1/3 of Americans who die from a gunshot are killed by a police officer.
Jesus.
Did I send you that statistic?
Yeah.
That's a crazy thing, man. And
how many
in
of them are
Minnesota, you were 13 times more likely to be killed by a police officer if you were black than if you were white.
Ugh.
13 times more likely. And so there are just so many people being gunned down and beat up and jockeyed around by police because they're mentally ill or because they need, like you said, when there's a domestic abuse situation going on, when there's a husband yelling at a wife, when there's a mother yelling at a child, and the police get called, who really needs to be on the scene? A counselor? A person who's trained to intervene? A person that understands the psychology of what's going on there?
I mean, that's what I
or
think.
somebody who barely made
Call
it
me
out
stupid, Charles. Call me
somebody who
stupid.
barely made it out of high school who has a gun.
Yes.
I mean, I think about some of these guys that I knew in high school who ended up becoming cops. They weren't the best and the brightest. I mean, let's be honest. Some of the people who are on the police force, I'm sure maybe they were the best and the brightest, but police have their time and their place. But as D-Ray says, it needs to be a very narrowly focused, small sliver. And we need to shrink. Defund doesn't mean that the cops should be wearing a barrel and eating bread crusts. It means that there should be fewer of them, and that they should have a very specific scope, and that there shouldn't, that a lot of things just aren't in their wheelhouse. That's not a cop job.
Right.
And so defund means we need fewer of them, and we need a lot of them that are just dudes walking around. They don't need guns. I mean, in Japan, none of them have guns and nobody gets shot. That's one interesting example I've read about.
Now back to the show.
I got it. Sorry, guys. We're having a little mic issue here. Humidity in North Carolina. But getting back to it and talking about policing and talking about reform is...
Talking about my man D-Ray.
D-Ray. Is... Guys, when you put a lot of police... Like Charles is saying, like, police should only be called in a very narrow situation. And I agree with that. When you put police on the street and you say, go find crime, and a lot of things are criminal, they're going to go find it. But that doesn't make us safer. Like, if our goal is to make society safer, that doesn't necessarily mean put more people in jail. Like, if your goal really is, I want to make society safer, then you need to look at what makes you feel unsafe. And if you feel...
And what makes you feel safe.
And what makes you feel safe. And I was actually talking to my parents about this. My parents live on a little cul-de-sac in North Raleigh. In my life, I have never seen a police officer on that road. Never. And for 13 years, we never even locked the house. So,
which is surprising considering some of the things we did in high school.
Yeah, right. But the point is, my parents obviously don't need police to feel safe. And then they could argue, well, I felt safe because they were just down there controlling the bad neighborhoods and those people couldn't come to my neighborhood. Maybe, but I don't think that there's data that supports that thesis. Like, we have to talk theoretical here. I think in reality, there's just not that many people out to get us. And and when you have high employment, there's even less. And when drugs are cheap, there's even less. And when you have mental health counselors out there, there's even less. It's like, I remember everyone like, George Bush did such a great job after 9/11. There was never another terrorist attack. Barack Obama did such a good job after 9/11. There was never another terrorist attack. Well, that's possibly true, but there's also the statement that could be true is maybe there's just not that many people out there to get us. And maybe, just maybe, there's not 2 billion Muslims who are like dying, clamoring to like come into the United States and blow up buildings. Maybe it's just a very small percentage of like a few hundred people.
Also, those buildings were exploded by internal explosives.
Whoa.
But anyway, all right. So, here's what I want to talk
Charles,
about. Here's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about 9/11 conspiracy right now. Here's what I want to talk about.
Okay, but hold on. Let me. I want to make sure, Charles. I want to make sure my point after you made that fucking stupid ass comment. I want to make sure my point is very clear.
Hey, architects and engineers for the truth.
I want to make sure that my statement is very clear. Is that maybe, just maybe, our concept of safety is really not as maybe it's not as unsafe as we think it is.
Well, this is what I want to talk to.
Okay.
I want to speak to that point. D-Ray does this, and I'm going to echo D-Ray right now. Think about the place where you feel the most safe? Just picture that in your mind. Take a moment, take a breath. We're going to have a little meditative moment here, moment of Zen. You're going to close your eyes and imagine the time and the place where you feel the most safe. Like you were talking about your parents' cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And then ask yourself this question. Are the police there?
They are not.
They're not.
The police are not there. And you don't need the police to be safe.
Totally agree.
And that's kind of the point. And the police do have a role to play. But his point is, you don't that whole thing that you're pointing out, Steve, that's a myth.
It's an utter myth that we are safer by having more police officers. It's a fucking myth. There's more crime to be found, especially if you're criminalizing things that are not dangerous. But it's not safer. It just means that you're just criminalizing things and putting people in jail because it's profitable.
Here's the other question. What is the thing that your loved one, your sister, your mom, your brother, your child could do that it's okay for a police officer to shoot and kill that person? When is it okay for a cop to kill your child?
I mean, if he takes
put a bullet through their head.
If my son grabs my AR-15s and goes to school and starts shooting other kids, I would be okay with the cop killing him. But outside of that, I can't think of one.
Yeah. And those are not the scenarios.
It's just like
those are not the scenarios in which these black guys are getting killed. I mean, what did George Floyd do? Like, what if George Floyd was your son?
He literally. That's another thing I say about drugs, and we'll get to that in a second. He literally tried to pass a $20 bill that they believed was counterfeit. That's what he did. And my thinking, and by the way, the dude's from Rayford, North Carolina, shout out North Carolina, is like, my thinking is he was probably fucking angry because he probably went and worked and got paid $20 and was like, I'm trying to go get something to eat for my kids or a pack of smokes or a beer to go drink on my Tuesday afternoon, which, by the way, is fucking his right and his privilege to do. And they're like, I'm sorry, we can't take your bill. He's like, man, come on, man. I just work for this. I just want to get paid. I just want this. I don't think fucking George Floyd was running a counterfeit ring. Like, Jesus Christ, no.
Even if he was, if your son was running a counterfeit ring, should he still come home alive?
I think that's a kind of unfair analogy, though. Like, in a mother's eyes, in most mothers' eyes, there is no wrong that the son can do. I feel like
That's not true.
Okay, but I feel like your question should be, like, when is it okay to kill Steven? When is it okay to kill me? Like,
okay, I mean, I still think you're going to get the same answer.
I'm not saying there shouldn't be a consequence. I'm not saying your child shouldn't go to jail. I'm also raising the question of, I mean, like, most developed countries have done away with the death penalty. So, I mean, I'm not saying, like, and Steve's point made my point. Like, that's what my brain went to, is it's like, if my kid was standing there with an automatic weapon mowing people down and killing other people, and police had no option but to take that person out by force so they stopped taking other people's lives, then that's the situation, right? And that's what they're faced with.
Outside of that.
But my point is, what a lot of African American people in this country are grappling with is people who are being killed because someone thought they had a gun, they were reaching for their wallet, they tried to pass a counterfeit bill. And like, if those things happen and it's your child, are you okay with the police killing your kid? And that's the point of, like, that's a ridiculously over-the-top show of force.
You know, we need to get on the show.
So that's why we
question
the police.
Yeah, let's get some police. Yeah, it'd be fun.
I'd be interested
because I listen. I try really hard to walk in every man's shoes. And if I'm out and it's 2:00 in the morning and it's a bad neighborhood, and it's a bad neighborhood because drugs are really expensive, let me remind everyone of that. And, I'm stopping a car with tinted windows, and yeah, I'd be scared too. But my point is, should he be stopping that car? Should that neighborhood even be hot because drugs are expensive? Like, what would happen if that guy could not profit off drugs? Would the neighborhood be safe? I don't know. One thing I do know is we haven't fucking tried it. And so it's like, well, in Chicago this weekend, there was 18 murders. We need to make things more illegal. Well, every time we make things more illegal, we set a new record of murders. Maybe we should go the other direction. It's just
Right.
like, oh, there goes Steve Radamus with his fucking crazy ideas. You mean things that actually fucking work supported by data? Because what you're saying clearly doesn't work.
Well, let's talk about Malcolm Gladwell for a minute. So Malcolm Gladwell's response to the George Floyd was he reran a chapter of a book he published like 7 years ago about the riots that happened in Ireland 50 years ago. So in 1968, 69, 70, there was the Protestant Catholic stuff going on with the IRA. And basically what I gleaned from what I listened to was there were Protestants and Catholics fighting with each other, and there were a few deaths here and there. The English eventually sent in the English army, and they sided with the Protestants. And their approach was the more, what you just said, the more that there's fighting and killing, the more we're going to tighten the wrench. We're going to bring in tanks. We're going to fucking lock people down. We're not going to let people out of their houses. They're not going to be able to get bread and milk. We're going to fucking just like turn the screws on everybody until they stop fucking fighting. And what happened was the fighting got worse and worse and worse. People got more
Have you ever
and
seen
more
a mammal
pissed.
acquiesce in his own extinction? Have you ever seen a mammal like, go ahead, giraffe, eat me? No, go ahead, lion, eat me. Like, no, the motherfucker fights back.
Right. And so the more you turn the screws and the more you fucking bring in the cops and bring in the National Guard and bring in the fucking tanks and tell people to stay in their houses and tell people to shut the fuck up, the more people fight back. And so they went from 100 people dying to 200 people dying to 1,000 people dying. And next thing you know, the fucking English army is like mowing people down, and fucking Irish women are out there with baby carriages, like hitting officers with umbrellas. And like it was just fucking mayhem and destruction and chaos. And it's because the mindset was, I have to be more strict and more controlling and more on top of people and limit freedoms more to get people to behave. And Steve, do you limit freedoms more to get people to listen and behave?
No. No.
Actually, I have a question for you, Steven.
Yeah.
I feel like you might could answer this. This is a great analogy. So, you're the boss of this factory. You have an employee that's not doing their job or doing it incorrectly. How do you handle it?
I mean, it depends on, is it the first, second, or third time?
I'd say it's happened for a week straight.
I mean, you pull them
Are we
aside.
talking about Jeb?
Sorry. What have I been doing wrong, Steve?
Yeah, exactly. You pull them aside, and you talk to them one-on-one, and you say, hey, listen, what don't you understand about what's happening right now? You don't threaten them. You don't yell at them. You don't belittle them. You don't embarrass them. You go and say, hey, what's the challenge here? Like, why don't you get this? And then at a certain point, you have to decide, is that person capable of a job or the job that you put them in? But I always say it's never my employee's fault. It's always my fault. Like, if I set someone up to fail by asking them to do something that they can't do for physical limitations or training limitations, that's not their fault. That's my fault. And if we set people up for society to do things that they can't do, that's not their fault. That's our fault. And that's like, there's always going to be a leader in a society. And a leader is someone who's going to say, hey, listen, I want everyone to succeed. I want everyone to eat. I want everyone to have a good time. I want everyone to feel safe. And I want to set everyone up to succeed. Now, there's sometimes a bad apple. And, I've had hundreds.
Sometimes there's a good apple.
But, I've literally probably worked with hundreds. I don't ever call anyone who worked for me. Everyone works with me. Hundreds of people. And I've pretty much had successful relationships with most of them. And
Did you say sexual relationship?
0, including except for my wife. My wife and I have had a lot of sexual relationships. Our children show that as proof, and she works with us. But
That's a successful relationship.
it's a successful relationship, honey. Love you, baby.
Successful.
But the point is,
Am I cut off?
exactly.
Sorry,
Cut
sorry.
that mic. But no, the point is, like, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and if someone's not doing what you need them to do, don't blame them. Blame yourself. And so if we see something happening in society that we don't like, don't blame the individual who's committing the act. Ask what you can do to make the situation better. And I think that's what we have to do as white men. How can we make this situation better? And that's something that you and I were talking about earlier tonight. And we don't know the answer, right? You know, and there's certain things I'm willing to do and there's certain things I'm not willing to do. But I think that you and I have to really, Charles, ask the question, like, as white men, as leaders of the white community, as examples, as people who can reach out and offer olive branches, we have to figure out what we can do to make the situation better. Like you said, it doesn't mean we have to apologize. It doesn't mean we have to feel guilty. It does mean, though, we have to own it and take responsibility for it and try to change it.
And I want to close with the thing that I think we can do, and the reason why when we talk about diversity, what that really means is just spending time with people who are different than you. They might be people who look like you. They might be people who don't look like you. But why is that important? It's cultural. You need to understand how people talk to their mom, what they eat for Sunday dinner, where they go on vacation.
That's a really good point.
What pants they like to wear. It's all these little subtle details of people's lives that make up their unique individual culture that might be influenced by Germany, Ireland, England, or it might be Haiti or Trinidad and Tobago or Panama. It might be California or Maine. And so we're all have these sort of nuanced differences of culture. And so if we all just kind of spend time with each other and don't judge each other's cultures, but just kind of like, hey, that's cool, that's interesting, which I feel like a lot of people kind of naturally are drawn to what's new and different and sort of exotic, quote, or whatever. If you could just open your mind to cultural difference, then you're much less likely to be discriminatory in a place of work or a place of business or just in general. And so I think that's really like going back to what we were talking about earlier with like cultural norms, that's a big thing that white people can do. And honestly, I think that's something that everybody can do.
I mean, I think that's a good point to end on. Like, if you had a take-home message from this podcast, I would definitely say that go out there and try to learn something and be part of something that makes you feel in the slightest bit uncomfortable. Like, go look at another culture. Go eat at a restaurant you normally wouldn't eat at. Go shop at a store you normally wouldn't shop at. Go talk to someone at a park you normally wouldn't talk to. And just listen to them. And you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to disagree with them. You can just fucking listen. You can just be a good neighbor and listen.
JFL.
You know, and so it's really not.
That's
like,
our acronym, JFL, baby.
What's that? Just fucking listen. I like that. But the point is, like, what can white Americans do? You can go out there and listen. You go down. Go to a part of town, quote unquote, where the culture is black or minority, quote unquote. Go eat at a Mexican restaurant. Go eat at a soul food restaurant. Like, go talk to the waitresses and waiters. You know what you're gonna find out? You have a lot of fucking things in common.
Just remember Daryl Davis. You guys know Daryl Davis?
Who's Daryl Davis?
Daryl Davis is the guy. He's the musician who became friends with a bunch of guys who were in the KKK.
Yeah.
And he ended up,
But you're gonna realize
over a period of time, they befriended him and they left the KKK.
You're gonna realize how much more we have in common than we don't. Like, at the end of the day, if you're just some uppity, scared white woman in a North Raleigh neighborhood and you go down to Southeast Raleigh and you talk to the waitress who's also a mom of 2 kids that has boys or girls the same age as you do, you're going to realize she has the same fucking issues. She's tired of her husband's bullshit. She fucking is trying to
Kids
put food on
don't
the
listen.
table. Kids don't listen. She's frustrated that schools aren't open. You know, she thinks the COVID was her overreaction. You know, like, you're going to realize that the Venn diagram of your lives are so much more common than they're not. And I guess the last thing, man, don't let the media drive a stake between us. Like, there's no race war. We don't need to have a race war. I understand the media is embarrassed that they made COVID out to where 55 million Americans were going to die next Tuesday, and it didn't happen. And, like, guys, there's no race war. We don't hate each other. We need to go talk with each other. We need to go learn from each other. White people out there, we need to go fucking listen. We need to go listen. We need to go listen. And not to the fucking media.
I do want to say one more thing. It's a great way to end. I'm the producer, Jeb. We'd love to hear from you guys, so give us an email at jebcpusa@gmail.com. Whether you disagree, whether you agree, whether you want to be on the show, give me your thoughts. Seriously.
What's that email address?
jebcpusa@gmail.com. Jeb is spelled Jeb. So jebcpusa@gmail.com.
I think it's a great idea.
Pew, 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 pew.
Squirrel. Bye, guys.